On a dreary, rain-soaked evening in late October, Sarah sat curled up in the warmth of her small, dimly lit apartment, the windows streaked with raindrops that caught the reflection of the street lamps outside, casting ghostly lights across the room. Her phone, resting on the arm of her sofa, buzzed quietly against the fabric, a new Tinder notification. Despite her better judgment, influenced perhaps by the haunting atmosphere of the stormy night, she swiped it open. "You've matched with James," the screen announced. James had a charming smile and a bio that read, "Looking to find someone to share in an adventure." Intrigued, Sarah tapped the message icon, and their conversation began with the usual pleasantries. "How are you? What do you do?" The chat quickly deepened, as if driven by the storm's urgency, into more personal territories. As midnight approached, James suggested something peculiar. "Ever tried a midnight walk? It's exhilarating under this storm." The idea was absurd, yet thrilling. "Meet me at Willow's End, the little park off 5th Street, he wrote. Though hesitant, the monotony of her recent days urged her to agree. She scribbled a quick note to her roommate, grabbed her raincoat, and stepped into the chilly embrace of the night. The park was a silhouette of shadows and swaying branches, the trees whispering secrets in the wind. At the far end of the park, near the ancient oak, she spotted a figure under a single flickering streetlight, James. His smile was reassuring, yet as she approached, the light above him buzzed and died, plunging them into darkness. "Perfect night for a ghost story, don't you think?" he said, his voice eerily calm amidst the howling winds. As they walked, James recounted tales of Willow's End, the mysterious disappearances, the sightings of a woman in white, the unexplained sounds of chains dragging along the paths. Sarah's heart pounded, not just from the stories, but from the way James seemed to relish them. Each tale ended on a cliffhanger, leaving her anxious for more, her fear tinged with a morbid curiosity. "Want to see something?" James suddenly asked, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling fervor. Before she could respond, he led her off the path to an older part of the park, where the trees grew denser, the shadows deeper. They stopped in front of a decrepit mausoleum, its door slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. "They say this is where the woman in white was last seen," he whispered, pushing the door further open. Reluctantly, Sarah peered inside. The air was musty, thick with the scent of mold and decay. Her phone's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing old, cobweb-laden corners and an empty sarcophagus with its lid disturbingly displaced. As her light swept across the stone floor, it caught something, a sudden movement, or perhaps a trick of the light. She gasped, stepping back, bumping into James. He grabbed her shoulders, steadying her. "Did you see that?" she breathed, her voice a mix of fear and disbelief. "Sometimes they want to be seen," James replied, his voice a whisper that sent shivers down her spine. His grip tightened, his nails digging slightly into her skin. The air around them felt charged, heavy with a presence they could not see but could undoubtedly feel. The wind outside howled louder, as if echoing the screams of the long departed. Abruptly, James released her, stepping back into the light that managed to pierce the doorway. "I think it's time we head back," he said, the normalcy of his tone at odds with the night's eerie turn. As they walked back to the main path, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her back, watching, waiting. At the park's entrance, James stopped, his face serious under the streetlight's glow. "You should go home," he said abruptly. "And maybe delete Tinder for a while. Some connections are better left unmade." Confused and frightened, Sarah nodded, hurrying away from the park, from James, and from the chilling night that had turned her quest for a simple thrill into a nightmare. As she arrived home, her phone buzzed once more. It was another Tinder notification. This time, it was a new match, a profile with no picture, no bio, only a name, The Woman in Light. Her heart skipped a beat as she stared at the screen, the rain outside tapping against her window like fingers seeking entry. The story was far from over. Sarah had opened a door that perhaps should have remained closed, and now, something had followed her home from Willow's End, eager to tell its side of the story. Continuing from where the previous segment left off, Sarah sat in the faint glow of her living room, her fingers trembling as they hovered over her phone screen. The profile of the woman in white seemed to stare back at her, its blankness more menacing than any photograph could have been. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the old clock on the mantel and the relentless patter of rain against the windows, each drop a tiny echo of the dread building inside her. She knew she should dismiss it, delete the app, forget the night's earlier terror, but curiosity, that deep, gnawing need to understand, wouldn't let her. Instead, she clicked on the mysterious profile, her breath held tight in her chest. The screen flickered, an unusual glitch, or so she hoped, and then the message screen opened on its own. No words, just an empty text box. Sarah typed, her fingers cold and stiff, "Who are you?" The message sent, but there was no immediate reply. The wait was agonizing, the silence of her apartment oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours until the notification pinged. It was a reply from the profile. The message was simple, yet it chilled her to the bone. "Behind you." Reflexively, Sarah snapped her head around, her eyes wide with terror, scanning the dimly lit room. There was nothing, no one there, just the soft shadows of ordinary objects that seemed to mock her fear. She turned back to her phone, ready to block the user, when another message came through, "Not there, here." It was followed by a map link. Tentatively, Sarah clicked on the link, which opened to reveal a location just a few blocks away from her apartment, the park where she had just left James. The dot blinked menacingly, an unspoken invitation, or a dare. The logical part of her mind screamed for her to ignore it, to turn off her phone, to try and sleep. But the part of her that had gone to the park, that had looked into the mausoleum, needed answers. Grabbing her raincoat again, she ventured out into the stormy night. The city streets were deserted, the only sounds were her footsteps on the wet pavement and the occasional distant roll of thunder. As she neared the park, the wind picked up, swirling around her, as if trying to push her back, warning her away from the darkened paths that led under the canopy of ancient, whispering trees. Reaching the park, Sarah's phone vibrated with another message, "Closer." Her heart raced, and every shadow seemed to shift, every sound was magnified by her fear. She moved deeper into the park, guided by the blinking dot on her map, which led her back to the mausoleum. The door was fully open now, swinging in the wind with an eerie creak that seemed to synchronize with the throbbing of her pulse. She stood at the threshold, the darkness within more profound than the night around her. The air was colder here, the smell of decay stronger. Another buzz from her phone jolted her, a message reading, "Enter." Sarah paused, her mind a tumult of fear and fascination. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside, her phone's flashlight cutting a swath through the blackness. The inside of the mausoleum was as she remembered, but the sarcophagus now had something placed atop it, a small, old-fashioned locket, tarnished by time. Hesitantly, she picked it up, the metal cold against her skin. It felt heavier than it looked. The locket clicked open in her hand, revealing not photographs, but a mirror on one side, and on the other, a painting of a woman, pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to look right through her. Sarah gasped, dropping the locket as the image seared itself into her mind. The sound of the locket hitting the stone floor echoed, followed by a whisper of movement behind her. She whipped around, flashlight darting across the room, catching only glimpses of shadows that seemed to flit just beyond the beam of light. Her phone vibrated again, but this time she was too afraid to look. The messages were coming faster now, each one more demanding. "Look at me, see me, help me." The last message simply repeated, "Help me," over and over again. The atmosphere was charged, the air thick with an unspoken narrative of sorrow and darkness, the story of the woman in the locket perhaps, trapped within the confines of worn silver and glass. Fear gripped Sarah tighter, her breathing shallow and rapid as she backed toward the entrance of the mausoleum, her eyes never leaving the shadows that danced just out of the light's reach. She was about to turn and run when a cold hand grasped her shoulder, a touch so unexpected and chilling that she could not even scream, her voice lost in the whirlwind of her panicked breaths. Turning slowly, her heart pounding against her chest, she prepared to confront whatever haunted this place, her mind teetering on the brink of terror, the narrative of the night still unfolding, each moment a thread in a tapestry of horror that was far from complete. The grip tightened, the cold seeping deeper into her bones, as she turned to see who or what had dared to drag her into this nightmare. As Sarah turned to face the source of the chilling touch, her breath caught in her throat. Before her stood not the grotesque or spectral figure she had anticipated, but a woman, her features eerily similar to those in the painting inside the locket. Her face was pale, almost translucent, eyes deep pools of sorrow and fear. She wore a faded Victorian gown that fluttered slightly with the wind that swept through the broken door of the mausoleum, and her hair, long and matted, framed her face like a mournful halo. "Who are you?" Sarah managed to whisper, her voice trembling as much as her hands. The woman's lips moved, but no sound came at first. Then, like a delayed echo, her words reached Sarah's ears. "Help me, free me." The air around them thickened, the shadows in the corners of the mausoleum seeming to draw closer, as if they were listening. Sarah, though terrified, felt a surge of empathy for this apparition, this woman who seemed so desperate, so bound to this place. "How can I help you?" Sarah asked, her fear momentarily overshadowed by her urge to help, to understand what tethered this soul to such a dark and desolate existence. "You saw the locket," the woman said. her voice a hollow sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was mine, once, before everything changed. Before I was trapped here. Her eyes, reflecting a torment long endured, locked onto Sarah's, a silent plea evident within their depths. Sarah, her own heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination, nodded slowly. "Tell me what to do. How can I free you?" She was now completely caught in the web of this ghostly narrative, each thread pulling her deeper into the mystery and sorrow of the woman's fate. "The locket, it binds me," the woman explained, her voice growing fainter, as if speaking cost her whatever little energy she had left. "It was given to me by one who wished me harm, a curse disguised as a gift. I cannot leave this place, not until it is destroyed. Only then can my spirit move on." Understanding dawned on Sarah, a plan forming in her mind. She stooped to pick up the locket, its cold metal sending a shiver through her spine. "Destroy this?" "How?" she asked, holding the locket out towards the woman. "In fire, only fire can cleanse it, release the bond it holds over me." The woman's figure seemed to flicker with the suggestion, like a flame buffeted by the wind, her form unstable and wavering. Without hesitation, Sarah pulled out her lighter, always tucked away in her pocket for emergencies, a small, trivial item that now held the weight of salvation. The rain had stopped, and the air outside the mausoleum had taken on the crispness of pre-dawn. She stepped outside, finding a small clearing away from the overhanging branches. There, she set the locket down on the wet ground, flicked the lighter, and watched as the flame caught hold of the ancient silver. The metal heated, the surface of the locket beginning to blacken and warp. The woman's apparition appeared at the doorway of the mausoleum, her form clearer now, less tortured. She watched the destruction of her earthly tether with an expression of deep longing and profound relief. The locket's paint bubbled, the silver melted, and as the last of it turned to molten liquid, the air around them shimmered with a sudden warmth. The woman gave Sarah a look of deep gratitude, her lips parting in a farewell Sarah felt more than heard. As the last wisps of the woman's form dissipated like mist at sunrise, a sense of peace settled over the area, the oppressive atmosphere of the mausoleum lifting like a dark cloud clearing after a storm. Sarah stood alone as dawn broke, the first light of the morning painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. She felt exhausted, every muscle aching, her mind weary from the night's ordeals. Yet, there was a sense of accomplishment, a feeling of having righted a wrong, of having freed a soul long trapped in despair. As she turned to leave the now peaceful clearing, her phone buzzed with another notification. Her heart, which had just begun to settle, skipped a beat. She pulled the phone from her pocket with a hesitant hand, the screen lighting up with a new Tinder notification. This time, it was a message from James. "Did you do it? Is she free?" Sarah paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. How did James know about the woman? What was his connection to the locket and the curse? The questions spiraled in her mind, each one leading to darker, more ominous possibilities. She typed back, "Who are you really?" Her message sent, and as she awaited his reply, the air around her grew inexplicably cold again, the early morning light dimming as if a cloud had passed over the sun. James's reply came almost immediately, chilling Sarah to the bone. "Come back to the park, there's more to the story. It's far from over." The message ended with coordinates to a different part of the park, a place Sarah had not explored yet. With a deep breath, she began her walk back into the depths of Willow's End, her resolve fortified by the night's events, but her mind teeming with apprehension about what awaited her in the new dawn's light. The story, it seemed, was indeed far from over. As Sarah made her way back into the shadowy embrace of Willow's End, the first rays of dawn that had briefly lit the sky were now obscured by rolling, dark clouds, foreboding and dense. The park, with its gnarled trees and mist-laden paths, seemed to have regained its sinister aura, almost as if it had never relinquished it at all. Each step Sarah took was heavy, weighed down by a cocktail of dread and curiosity, her mind reeling with the possibilities of what James could truly be involved in, and what secrets the park still hid in its dark heart. She approached the coordinates James had sent, her phone's map guiding her to a secluded part of the park that was unfamiliar to her, even in the light of day. This area was overgrown, the paths less trodden, the trees older and more imposing. The air here was thick, damp with the scent of rotting leaves, and something else, something metallic, a tang of blood perhaps. It was a part of the park that seemed forgotten by time, or intentionally avoided by those who frequented the more welcoming sections. As she ventured deeper, the wind picked up, whispering through the trees with a sound that was almost like words that Sarah couldn't quite understand, but felt rather than heard, a warning, perhaps, or a lament. She shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her as she walked. Her phone vibrated in her hand, startling her. It was another message from James, "You're close now. Keep going." There was something about the terseness of his messages that unsettled her even more. What did he know about this place, about the things that had happened here? And why bring her back? Ignoring the screaming instincts that told her to turn back, Sarah pressed on, driven by a need for answers. Finally, she arrived at a small clearing, the grass unnaturally lush and green, contrasting starkly with the surrounding decay. In the center of the clearing stood an old fountain, long dry, its stone cracked and moss-covered, with a statue of an angel in the middle, its face eroded but its wings still spread wide as if in mid-flight. Her phone buzzed again. "Look inside the fountain," the message from James read. Cautiously, Sarah approached, peering into the basin of the fountain. It was empty, save for a few dead leaves and a small, leather-bound book, its cover worn and pages swollen with moisture. She reached out, hesitated, then took the book, opening it to the first page. The handwriting was elegant but rushed, the ink smeared in places by water damage. It read, "Whoever finds this, know that what I write is the truth of Willow's End, a truth that has been buried in shadow and silence for too long. This place holds a curse, one that binds not just a single soul, but the very essence of this land. Sarah's breath caught as she turned the page, eager and apprehensive to read more. The entries detailed the history of the park, once the estate of a wealthy but tormented baron who was obsessed with the occult. He had conducted rituals in this very clearing, attempting to breach the veil between worlds, seeking knowledge and power. But something had gone wrong, terribly wrong, and a door once opened was never fully closed, leaving the park tainted with the residual energies of those rituals. As she read, the wind grew colder, harsher, whipping the pages back and forth as if trying to tear the book from her hands. She looked around, half expecting to see someone or something watching her, but she was alone. Or so it seemed. Suddenly, her phone rang, a sharp, piercing ring that made her jump. It was James, calling this time. Hesitantly, she answered, "James? What is this place? What are you not telling me?" His voice was low, urgent. "It's not safe to talk over the phone. I'm here, in the park. Come to the north side, by the old boathouse. I'll explain everything." "Why should I trust you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling, not just from the cold. "You don't have to trust me," James replied, "but I'm trying to fix what's been done. Please, just come." The line went dead then, leaving Sarah in the chilling silence of the clearing. She clutched the book to her chest, a lifeline in the swirling darkness of her thoughts. With each step toward the boathouse, her sense of foreboding grew, the stories from the book echoing in her mind, merging with the oppressive atmosphere of the park. What awaited her at the boathouse? Would James reveal the full story, the true nature of his connection to Willow's End? And could she handle the truth, now that she was so deeply entangled in the dark history of this cursed place? Her footsteps quickened, driven by a mixture of fear and an unyielding need for answers, each step bringing her closer to a revelation that promised to be as dark as the storm clouds above. Sarah's trek through the dense underbrush towards the old boathouse was a tapestry of flickering shadows and unsettling noises. The rustling of the trees sounded like whispered warnings, and every snap of a twig underfoot echoed like a gunshot in the eerie silence. The overgrown path, barely visible under the creeping vines and fallen leaves, seemed to stretch interminably before her, each step an effort against the clinging dampness of the ground. As she neared the boathouse, a structure forgotten by time and obscured by the weeping willows that lined the bank of the park's neglected pond, the air grew thick with the scent of stagnant water and decay. The boathouse itself loomed like a specter from the mist, its wood rotten, its windows dark and empty, staring like hollow eyes into the soul of the park. Her phone, silent since the last call, vibrated violently in her pocket, startling her. It was a text from James. "I see you're close. Hurry." The urgency in his message propelled her forward, pushing aside the last tendrils of doubt that clung to her thoughts. She quickened her pace, her breath visible in the cold air, each exhale a cloud of vapor that mingled with the fog enveloping her. Reaching the boathouse, Sarah found the door slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning her inside. She pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest, a sound so loud in the stillness that it seemed to carry across the water. Inside, the boathouse was shrouded in shadows, the only light filtering in through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting strange, elongated patterns on the floor. "James," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it seemed to reverberate through the space, unsettling a flock of birds that had taken refuge in the rafters. Their sudden, frenzied flapping was a burst of chaotic sound that made her heart leap. "Back here," came a reply, not from James, but another, deeper voice, unfamiliar and chillingly calm. Sarah paused, her hand on the wall to steady herself. The air felt colder here, the darkness deeper. She rounded a corner inside the boathouse, and there, illuminated by the beam of a single flashlight, was James, standing beside an older man, his face gaunt, his eyes a piercing, unsettling blue. "Sarah, you came," James said, his voice a mixture of relief and something else she couldn't quite place, guilt, perhaps, or fear. "Who's this?" Sarah asked, her gaze shifting between James and the stranger. "This is Edward," James explained. "He knows about the park, about the rituals, the curses, everything. He's been helping me understand what we're up against." Edward stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate. "You've felt it, haven't you? The pull of this place, the darkness that clings to your skin like dew in the morning mist." Sarah nodded, unable to find her voice, her mind racing to piece together the fragments of the night's discoveries. "Willow's End was cursed long before the Baron ever set foot here," Edward continued, his voice low, each word measured and heavy with the weight of unspoken secrets. "The land was sacred, used by ancient peoples for rites we can barely comprehend now, rites that balance the thin veil between our world and what lies beyond." James interjected, "The Baron's rituals disturbed that balance. He opened a door he couldn't close, unleashed things he couldn't control. And now, we need to set it right, or the disturbances, the hauntings, they'll never end." Sarah felt the darkness encroach further, the shadows in the corners of the boathouse seeming to pulse with a life of their own. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Edward and James exchanged a look, a silent communication that filled the space with tension. "We need to complete a ritual," James said finally, "one that will restore the balance, seal the door the Baron opened." "And you need my help?" Sarah's question hung in the air, a thread connecting her to the fate of Willow's End. "Yes," Edward said, "your connection to the woman in the locket, your willingness to help her spirit move on, it's made you a part of this, whether you intended it or not." Sarah took a deep breath, her decision made in the face of the unimaginable. "What do we need to do?" "We begin tonight," Edward stated, turning to prepare the space within the boathouse. "Under the new moon, when the veil is thinnest, and the spirits are most restless." As they readied themselves, the night deepened around them, the darkness becoming almost palpable, as if the shadows were alive, watching, waiting for the ritual that would decide the fate of Willow's End. The air was charged with an electric anticipation, and Sarah, caught between fear and resolve, prepared to step deeper into the unknown, her role in this eerie tableau far from over. As the last of the daylight faded into the murky shadows of twilight, the interior of the boathouse seemed to contract, the darkness drawing in close, as though it were a living, breathing entity. Edward began the preparations, outlining a circle with salt and scattering various herbs that gave off a pungent, earthy aroma as they hit the wooden floor. Candles were placed at cardinal points, their flames flickering uncertainly, as if reluctant to burn in such a forbidding atmosphere. James handed Sarah a small vial containing a liquid that shimmered with an ethereal glow. "It's a protection potion," he explained, seeing her hesitant look. "It will keep you anchored, safe from whatever might reach out during the ritual." Sarah nodded, accepting the vial and clutching it tightly. The cool glass felt reassuring against her palm. Around them, the wind began to howl, a mournful sound that seemed to carry with it the cries of those long lost, the sorrow of the forgotten dead. It whipped through the boathouse, finding every crack, every crevice, making the candles sputter and dance wildly. Edward began to chant in a language Sarah didn't understand, the words ancient, guttural, and strangely melodic. As he chanted, he moved around the circle, sprinkling more herbs, the air filling with a dense, smoky fragrance. James joined in, his voice a strong counterpoint to Edward's deeper tones. Sarah, standing just outside the circle, felt a chill run down her spine, her heart pounding in her chest as the temperature inside the boathouse dropped, her breath visible in the cold air. Suddenly, the center of the circle illuminated, a soft, pulsing light that grew steadily brighter with each pass of Edward's hands. The light seemed to throb in time with Sarah's heartbeat, faster and faster, until it was a blinding beacon in the dimness of the boathouse. Shadows seemed to recoil from the light, gathering instead just beyond the circle, swirling and coalescing into forms that were almost human, almost recognizable. "Focus on the light," James shouted over the howl of the wind and the increasingly loud chanting of Edward. "Don't look away, no matter what you hear." Sarah's ears filled with sounds, cries of pain, whispers of temptation, promises of dark desires fulfilled. It was almost too much to bear. She wanted to cover her ears, to scream, to run from the overwhelming assault of noise and fear. But she kept her eyes fixed on the light, on the shimmering point that seemed to be the only real thing in a world gone mad with shadows and sound. As the ritual reached its climax, the light exploded in a radiant burst, sending waves of force throughout the boathouse. Sarah felt the shockwave hit her like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. The shadows screamed, a terrible, rending sound that filled the air with despair. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The light snapped out, leaving only the dim, uncertain glow of the struggling candles. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Sarah's knees gave way, and she sank to the floor, the vial slipping from her hand and rolling across the wooden planks. Her head was spinning, her ears ringing. Slowly, she raised her eyes, half expecting the shadows to rush in upon her. But the boathouse was clear, the air free of the oppressive darkness that had filled it moments before. The salt circle remained, but the herbs were now just ash, and the candles had burnt down to stubs. Edward and James were both standing, although they looked as battered and shaken as she felt. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "It's done," Edward confirmed, his voice weary but relieved. "The balance is restored, the door closed. Willow's End is free, and so are we." James helped Sarah to her feet, his hand warm and steady. "You did it," he said, smiling in a way that reached his tired eyes. "You saved us all." As they stepped outside the boathouse, the first light of dawn was touching the sky, painting it with colors of hope and renewal. The park seemed peaceful, as if it had finally been released from a long-held breath of fear. Together, they walked out of Willow's End, the morning light growing stronger with each step, the nightmare of the night receding into memory. Behind them, the boathouse stood silent and still, a relic of a battle fought and won in the darkness, its secrets locked away once more. But as they reached the edge of the park, Sarah looked back one last time, a feeling of closure mingling with a whisper of lingering mystery, because some doors, once opened, leave traces that never fully disappear, echoes of darkness that might one day call again.